facing d4, the Benko Gambit is a fascinating opening to explore. Unlike most gambits, which usually involve sacrificing material in order to gain a quick initiative, the Benko is a positional gambit, creating long-term pressure that can remain relevant into the late middle game as well as endgame. We will also take a look at a related opening known as the Blumenfeld Gambit, which can also create interesting positions to explore. Let's get started and see how we reach the Benko Gambit. We reach the Benko Gambit after the opening moves d4. Instead of playing the classical d5, another popular option for black is to play knight f6, developing a piece and controlling the e4 and d5 central squares. White's most popular response is to grab more space with c4. If black wants to enter a Benoni structure, then black will strike in the center with c5, attacking the d4 pawn. White's most challenging response is to grab space with d5. Gaining a central space advantage, black has an important decision to make. How exactly should black challenge white's space advantage? One idea is to play e6, turning the game into the modern Benoni, which is the subject of another video. We reached the Benko Gambit after the signature move b5. We have now reached the Benko Gambit, named after the Hungarian-American Grandmaster Paul Benko. Black immediately challenges the c4 pawn, the key defender of d5. Let's begin to understand the basic ideas behind this gambit by exploring the main lines after c takes b5. White accepts the b5 pawn, and black offers another pawn with a6. After b takes a6, instead of capturing the a6 pawn immediately, a popular option is to first play g6, preparing to take control of the long dark square diagonal with bishop g7, exerting long-term pressure against white's queenside. White's most straightforward response is knight c3. When white threatens to play e4, taking control of the center, as well as opening up the light-squared bishop, this is a good moment to play bishop takes a6, regaining one of the pawns, but black still remains a pawn down. What exactly is the idea behind this gambit? Like many gambits, in exchange for the pawn, black enjoys a lead in development. The bishop on a6 exerts pressure down the f1 to a6 diagonal, so if white plays e4, then black can disrupt white's development with bishop takes f1. Thanks to gambiting the a-pawn, black's rook on a8 enjoys an active file, preparing long-term pressure down the a-file. Since black has also opened up the b-file, after castling kingside, the rook on h8 will often move to b8, joining the other rook and adding pressure down the a and b files. By removing the c4 pawn, white's d5 pawn is more sensitive to attack and is a long-term target for black. Now it's white's turn to make an important decision: how to complete kingside development. The most direct response is to take space in the center with e4, supporting the d5 pawn, as well as revealing tension between the light-squared bishops. So this allows black to exchange light-squared bishops with bishop takes f1, king takes f1, preventing white from castling, as well as opening up the a-file for black's rook. After trading bishops, black usually prevents any future e5 and d6 ideas by playing d6, locking the d5 pawn in its place. That being said, white still dreams of achieving a favorable e4 to e5 pawn break. You may wonder if white should willingly enter this line, as the king on f1 does look a bit strange. Many grandmasters choose this path as white from time to time, which is known as the king walk variation. The variation lives up to its name after g3. White is preparing to castle by hand, walking the king to g2, often followed by moving the rook to e1, preparing the e5 pawn break. Both sides typically continue to develop with bishop g7, activating the bishop on the long diagonal, a key piece that not only helps defend the king, but it also creates long-term pressure against white's queenside dark squares. White's king completes its kingside stroll with king g2, when black's king chooses a more direct path by castling. Both sides now develop their knights to sensible squares with knight f3, and knight b to d7. Black's pawn chain from e7 to c5 points toward the queenside, and it's no surprise that a common setup for black is to play queen a5, followed by rook f to b8, creating heavy major piece pressure on the queenside. Since black has incredible pressure on the queenside, white will often seek to open lines in the center, as well as the kingside, especially with e4 to e5, opening up lines and disrupting black's central pawn chain. One idea is to play rook e1, preparing e5, but black can create interesting complications with knight g4, discouraging e5, as well as opening up the dark-squared bishop. Since knight g4 can often be a useful idea for black, one idea is to prevent this move with h3, preventing knight g4, so this helps white prepare rook e1 and e5. When in doubt in the Benko Gambit, in most positions, black can create counterplay with queen a5 and rook f to b8. This position is no exception, but an interesting idea is the rook lift rook a6. This move supports the 6th rank and prepares to meet rook e1 with queen a8, aligning the queen on the same diagonal as the enemy king. So opening up the diagonal with e5 may not be a wise decision. One sample line is queen c2, reinforcing the e4 pawn as well as the knight on c3. Now that the queen is out of the way, a natural response is rook f to b8, increasing pressure down the queen side. Grandmaster Pavel Tregobov, an experienced Benko Gambit player, decided to first play knight b6. This knight on b6 is a very flexible piece. From b6 it adds pressure against d5. It sometimes jumps into the c4 square, adding pressure against the b2 pawn, especially in conjunction with the dark-squared bishop. Another popular idea is to offer a trade of knights with knight a4, trying to soften up squares on the queen side for black's major pieces to pressure. We'll see another possible point behind this move in a moment. His opponent, Grandmaster Pavel Elyanov, reinforced the queen side with rook e2. Supporting the 2nd rank, anticipating long-term pressure against the b2 and a2 pawns. Black continued with the thematic rook b8. Black's pieces have a magnetic attraction toward the queen side, preparing long-term positional pressure. White's rook on a1 is usually uncomfortable being under the constant watch of black's dark-squared bishop on the long diagonal, so a typical response is rook b1. This rook also escapes the pressure on the a-file at the expense of removing a protector of the a2 pawn. Another reason black plays knight b6 is to allow the kingside knight to utilize the d7 square with knight f to d7, revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure down the long diagonal. Black's pawn on c5 does an excellent job restraining b4, making it more challenging for white to activate the queen side. So an important positional threat white must keep in mind is c4, clamping down on the light squares. If c4 is allowed, black can play knight c5, making it difficult for the b2 pawn to advance, while also eyeing the juicy d3 square. White anticipates this possibility by playing b3, adding protection to the c4 square, while also revealing the queen and rook's protection of the a2 pawn. In this typical Benko position, black has several ideas, including activating the knight with knight e5, play as Grandmaster Tregobov did with rook c8, which ultimately resulted in a draw. But black should be in no rush to regain the pawn with bishop takes c3. Giving up your dark-squared bishop in the Benko is a decision that never should be made lightly, as it is an excellent source of queenside counterplay, and it also helps keep the king secure. White now allows black to enter a series of exchanges with queen takes c3, rook takes a2, rook takes a2, and queen takes a2. Black has regained the pawn for the moment, but must now pay the price for weakened dark squares after bishop b2, threatening queen g7 checkmate. Black can block the long diagonal with f6, but this allows white to confront black's wayward queen with rook a1. When black is forced to play knight takes d5, leading to an inferior ending down material. Instead of playing h3 or rook e1, white can also grab space on the queen side with a4. Advancing the a-pawn can make it more difficult to achieve b4, liberating white's backward b-pawn, but grabbing space on the queen side can create some interesting play. The typical queen a5 can run into bishop d2, when the a4 pawn helps support a future knight b5, discovering an attack against the queen. Black usually prefers to play queen b6, activating the queen on the b-file. A useful idea for white is to centralize the queen with queen e2, supporting the center as well as the queen side, after black's natural rook f to b8. World champion Magnus Carlsen, a player with experience on both sides of the Benko Gambit, closed the b-file with knight b5, an interesting idea to explore as a way to limit black's queenside pressure. Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura, playing white, demonstrated another instructive idea with bishop d2. setting up a trap, inviting black to play queen takes b2, when black's courageous queen will not return after rook h to b1, queen to c2, and knight e1, trapping the enemy queen. Instead of falling for the trap, his experienced opponent, Grandmaster Victor Boligan, played knight e8. The knight prepares to travel to the queen side, while also revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure down the long diagonal. Hikaru continued with rook h to b1, completing development while supporting the vulnerable b2 pawn. Black's knight continued its journey with knight c7, adding pressure against white's pawn on d5, when white responded with the instructive knight d1. This multi-purpose move opens up the dark-squared bishop, which supports a future a5 advance. The bishop can also limit black's counterplay with bishop c3, neutralizing black's active dark-squared bishop. The knight on d1 may look passive, and although it does help secure the b2 square, it may also find greater activity from e3, eyeing the desirable c4 square and helping support the center. Grandmaster Boligan responded with queen a6. This move speaks to the positional nature of the Benko Gambit. Even if queens are exchanged, in many positions black maintains long-term pressure on the queen side. Nakamura accepted the exchange of queens with queen takes a6, rook takes a6, and after the space-gaining a5, advancing the pawn into enemy territory while restricting black's knight from using the b6 square. Grandmaster Boligan revealed his idea, creating interesting complications with the disruptive pawn break f5, joining black's knight on c7 to break down white's central grip on the light squares by targeting the d5 and e4 pawns. White responded with e takes f5, allowing black to play knight takes d5, bringing his somewhat passive knight on c7 into the action. After f takes g6, h takes g6, and rook a4, Nakamura's rook vacates the long diagonal, removing pressure exerted by the dark-squared bishop. From the fourth rank, white's rook has the ability to pressure black's weakened king side, so Grandmaster Boligan prevented this possibility with knight b4, enjoying a strong post for the knight and blocking white's rook on the fourth rank. Grandmaster Nakamura decided to centralize his knight with knight e3, eyeing the important c4 and d5 queenside squares, as well as connecting with the king side if necessary. We have reached a typical Benko position in which black remains down a pawn, but black's pieces also remain active on the queen side, not making it easy for white to make progress on that side of the board. After a long struggle, Grandmaster Nakamura was able to win the game, but black certainly was not without chances as well, especially as the e7 to c5 pawn chain has the potential to advance and create serious complications. Instead of playing e4, inviting the king walk variation, white can preserve the light-squared bishop, as well as the right to castle, by fianchettoing the light-squared bishop with g3. Black needs to stay alert for bishop g2, followed by d6, discovering an attack against the rook on a8. So a simple way to prevent this is by playing d6, restricting the pawn on d5. Both sides typically continue by fianchettoing their bishops with bishop g2 and bishop g7. A natural continuation for white is knight f3, developing the knight and preparing to castle. Instead of deciding to castle immediately, black can delay this option and focus on completing queenside development with knight b to d7. If white decides to castle immediately, black can intensify the pressure against the d5 pawn with knight b6. This can be a bit annoying as white will often consider queen c2 and rook d1, supporting the center and preparing a future e4. Black is now ready to play bishop c4, adding pressure against the d5 and a2 pawns. One idea is to play rook e1 and prepare e4, leading to interesting play as black can respond by castling and then playing ideas such as knight f to d7, opening up the dark-squared bishop, followed by playing knight c4, increasing the pressure against white's queenside. White would love to play b3, but this leads to problems as white's now unprotected knight, as well as rook on a1, are exposed on the long dark-squared diagonal. One idea to prepare b3 is to first insert rook b1. Now that the rook has vacated the long diagonal, white is ready to play b3. But it turns out white is one move too late, as black can first play bishop c4, attacking both the d5 and a2 pawns. If white decides to play b3, this move is well met by knight f takes d5, revealing the dark-squared bishop's attack against the unprotected c3 knight, so black regains the pawn with an active position. Instead of castling immediately, an interesting move order is to first play rook b1, vacating the long diagonal, preparing to respond to knight b6 with b3. The interested viewer is encouraged to explore the position after queen a5, when after bishop d2, black can play the typical plan of castling kingside, followed by rook f to b8. That being said, it turns out that black can still decide to play knight b6, adding pressure against the d5 pawn. White is prepared to play b3, preventing bishop c4, but black's bishop can attack d5 with bishop b7. If white supports d5 by playing e4, black's bishop can continue its dance with bishop a6, preventing white's king from castling. A more popular choice is to play knight h4, revealing the light-squared bishop's protection of the d5 pawn, and hoping to achieve a favorable e4, f4 pawn advance in the future. After both sides castle, black can play knight g4, eyeing the e5 square while also revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure against the c3 knight. White's dark-squared bishop can benefit from the earlier decision to play b3 by playing bishop b2. White's position is looking quite solid, so black can make the double-edged decision to give up the dark-squared bishop with bishop takes c3. Bishop takes c3, surrendering the bishop pair and weakening the kingside dark squares in order to regain the pawn, as well as activate the rook with rook takes a2. By returning the pawn, white is now ready to grab space in the center with e4. When a complicated struggle can be expected, as white is prepared to play f4, enjoying a central space advantage, but black's structure remains quite resilient. After capturing the pawn on b5, white is by no means forced to accept the a6 pawn. A popular way to decline the gambit is by keeping the a-file closed with b6. By returning the pawn, white decides to prevent black from gaining two open files on the queen side. Since there isn't a bishop on a6, one of white's key ideas is to quickly play knight c3, followed by e4, grabbing more space in the center. One idea is to capture the pawn immediately with queen takes b6. Another option is to play d6, blockading the center, completing kingside development, and then playing knight b to d7, eventually regaining the pawn with knight takes b6, adding more pressure against d5 in the process. Another dynamic option worth exploring is confronting white's center immediately with e6. Since d takes e6 allows black to take over the center with f takes e6, white usually defends the pawn with knight c3. One idea for black is to increase the tension in the center with bishop b7. And international master John Bartholomew played the forcing sequence knight takes d5, inviting the exchanges knight takes d5, e takes d5, and queen takes d5. White centralizes the queen and threatens the rook on a8, so black responded with knight c6. John's opponent, Grandmaster Alexander Shabalov, known for his creative attacking play, did not hesitate to play actively with e4, taking space and preparing to attack f7 with bishop c4. Black prepared to evacuate the king from the center with bishop e7, responding to bishop c4 with kingside castling. White continued to develop and also prepared kingside castling with knight f3. Since the rook on a8 is deprived of its normal Benko counterplay down the a-file, Bartholomew decided to shift his counterplay to the b-file with rook b8. After Shabalov castled, black collected the pawn with rook takes b6, creating counterplay down the b-file. In the game, white decided to play queen h5, adding pressure against black's kingside, when after some adventures the game ended in a draw. But perhaps an even more challenging idea was knight g5, increasing the pressure against f7, provoking the somewhat awkward but solid queen e8. In this case, white's position does appear more comfortable to play, but black is certainly not without resources as well. Another way to decline the gambit on a6 is to play the modest-looking e3. White simply protects the b5 pawn and prepares to complete kingside development. Black has several interesting ideas to consider, including g6, bishop b7, and even e6. The e3 variation can prove annoying to some Benko players, as it appears white is containing black's most active queenside ideas, but Grandmaster Sam Shanklin demonstrated black's chances for counterplay with the most active response, a takes b5. Opening up the a file for the rook and preparing to meet bishop takes b5, with queen a5 check, forcing white to self-pin the knight with knight c3. Black intensified the pressure against the center with bishop b7, when white responded with the crafty bishop d2, unpinning the knight on c3. It's important for black to avoid the greedy knight takes d5, which is refuted by knight takes d5, capturing the knight and discovering an attack against the queen, preparing to meet queen takes b5, with knight c7 check, forking the king and queen. Instead of falling for the trap, Grandmaster Shanklin moved the queen to safety with queen b6, maintaining pressure against the light-squared bishop. One interesting idea for white is to play knight f3, allowing black to regain the pawn with knight takes d5, followed by anchoring the bishop with a4, creating a solid position for white. Grandmaster Shanklin's opponent continued with queen b3, supporting the d5 pawn, as well as the light-squared bishop. Shanklin countered white's central grip with e6, taking advantage of the pinned d5 pawn, as d takes e6 would allow bishop takes g2. White sensibly decided to reinforce the center with e4. It looks like white is doing an excellent job containing black's counterplay, and if black does not respond energetically against the central bind, white will enjoy a significant advantage. Instead of playing passively, Grandmaster Shanklin unleashed the tactical bomb, knight takes e4, removing a key defender of the d5 pawn. So after knight takes e4, black was able to double attack white's queen and knight with bishop takes d5. White's queen attempted to protect both the light-squared bishop as well as the knight with queen d3. Sam continued to assault white's light squares with f5. When after the knight retreated to g3, he was able to regain his sacrificed material with bishop takes g2, followed by bishop takes h1, giving up 2 minor pieces in exchange for a rook and 2 pawns. In addition to the material imbalance, black enjoys a superior pawn structure, which is especially relevant as white will have issues securing the king. Grandmaster Shanklin was able to utilize his active pieces and exploited the vulnerable white king, winning an instructive game. Instead of capturing the b5 pawn, white can consider playing anti-Benko lines such as a4, as well as queen c2. One popular anti-Benko line is knight f3. White simply ignores black's pressure against the c4 pawn, preparing to meet b takes c4 with knight c3, gaining a strong central advantage after an eventual e4. One sensible response for black is bishop b7, adding more pressure against white's center. But black can also create complications with the dynamic response e6, turning the game into the sharp Blumenfeld gambit. Black invites white to gain a pawn after d takes e6. When after f takes e6, white officially accepts the gambit with c takes b5. Unlike the Benko Gambit that focuses on opening up the queen side with an early a6, the Blumenfeld Gambit focuses on attacking chances in the center, as well as the king side, starting with d5, gaining more control in the center. The potential behind the Blumenfeld Gambit was revealed by world champion Alexander Elyekin. His opponent, Grandmaster Tarash, responded with the sensible e3. White secures the d4 square, preparing to continue development with knight c3. Elyekin focused on rapid development with bishop d6. White developed the other knight with knight c3. Black took the opportunity to castle the king. Not only does black castle the king, the rook on f8 will become an important attacking piece, taking advantage of the f-file. White continued with the modest but sensible developing move bishop e2. Black supported the center and focused on active development with bishop b7. In exchange for a pawn, black's lead in development, more active pieces, and central space advantage provides more than sufficient compensation. Elyekin continued with the direct plan of knight b to d7, queen e7, and then expanding in the center with e5. Black's energetic attacking play went on to win an impressive game, inspiring many players to explore the Blumenfeld Gambit more seriously. Although accepting the pawn is by no means a bad choice, it does demand quite a bit of accuracy from white. Instead of accepting the pawn, an active way to challenge the Blumenfeld is with bishop g5. pinning the knight on f6, so if black plays b takes c4, white can immediately play e4 or prepare it first with knight c3. In either case, white has a strong grip on the center with active development, so this is a line black wants to avoid. Instead of capturing the pawn on c4, a more reliable choice for black is to capture the pawn on d5. After c takes d5, black usually plays d6, cementing the central structure in place. White can respond with the direct e4, taking space in the center, supporting the d5 pawn, as well as threatening bishop takes b5 check. Black can reinforce the b5 pawn with a6, when white strikes against black's advanced queenside with a4, adding pressure against b5 and trying to provoke b4, weakening the c4 square, which would be an excellent post for a knight. Instead of reacting to white's queenside pressure, black can play bishop e7, unpinning the knight, so knight takes e4 has to be kept in mind. Supporting the center with bishop d3 is a somewhat rare move that is worth exploring, but white typically decides to remove the tension against the central pawns with the exchange bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6. White's central pawns are under less pressure for the time being, but black's active dark-squared bishop adds serious pressure down the long diagonal. One common line is a takes b5, capturing a pawn as well as opening up the a-file for the rook, when black typically responds with bishop takes b2, regaining the pawn and attacking the rook, and responding to rook a2, with bishop f6. A simple and direct choice is to support the center with bishop d3. White enjoys a space advantage, lead in development, as well as queenside pressure, so this is a reasonable way to challenge the Blumenfeld gambit. That being said, black is not without chances as well. Possessing the bishop pair is certainly a positive, and after black castles, one idea is to play bishop b7, preparing to play a takes b5, attempting to neutralize white's pressure down the a-file. The Blumenfeld gambit, although distinct from the Benko, can be used to complement the main lines of the Benko gambit if white declines the sacrifice. It's worth noting that the Blumenfeld gambit does not rely on the Benko gambit in order to appear on the board. Instead of playing c5, sometimes black prefers to play e6. It appears black is ready to meet knight c3 with bishop b4, turning the game into the solid Nimzo-Indian defense. But if white decides to play knight f3, then black can decide to play c5, preparing to respond to d5 with b5, transposing into the Blumenfeld gambit. Just like the Benko, the Blumenfeld is not a standalone defense to d4, but it certainly can complement Benoni, Benko, as well as Nimzo-Indian players. The Benko gambit is a unique gambit as it does not require a quick initiative to justify the invested material. Instead, the Benko gambit slowly builds pressure by opening lines on the queenside. Black is often not in a hurry to regain the sacrificed pawn, as the queenside pressure continues to build into the middle game, and in some cases, the pressure can still be felt in the endgame. White, of course, is certainly not without resources as well, and with patient play, white's extra pawn on the a-file may march forward to glory, or white may return the pawn in order to create dangerous play in the center, as well as the kingside. If white decides to decline the Benko with knight f3, then black may consider playing e6, turning the game into the sharp Blumenfeld gambit. Now you have no shortage of interesting ideas to explore. Thanks for investigating the dynamic Benko and Blumenfeld gambits, and best of luck in your future adventures.